Now to the details. The Court of Appeal has warned that it will not send the murder case involving VYBZ KARTEL and his 3 co-accused back for retrial unless the state can prove that all the original witnesses are available to testify. It was one of several grim declarations on what was a rough day in court for the prosecution as it opened its arguments in favor of retrying the 4 men for the 2011 murder of Clive Lizard Williams. Acting Director of Public Prosecutions Claudette Thompson faced tough questions related to the cost of a retrial, the availability of witnesses, and the risk of resubjecting the men to a prejudicial process. Ricardo Brooks has been covering the matter.
The Acting Director of Public Prosecutions had barely got to her feet when it became clear Thursday would be no easy day in the Court of Appeal. Claudette Thompson told the justices of the seriousness of the crime of murder and demanded an order for a retrial. Ms. Thompson pointed out that the crime was allegedly committed over an illegal gun and that the victim's body had never been found. The senior prosecutor maintained that justice must be done both ways. But Justice MacDonald Bishop wanted to know the exact cost of justice in the KARTEL matter. The senior jurist repeatedly pressed the prosecution as to whether the expense to the state to mount a retrial was a burden Jamaica would be prepared to bear. The acting DPP responded that the state would just have to foot the bill. Clearly unconvinced, Justice MacDonald Bishop responded, quote, "That's a novel interpretation of that factor, but I leave it alone," end quote. The judge pressed on, quote, "The law is really if one case is going to deplete our resources, time, money, human. That's what the case law says. We have to consider, do we really put our economy through that?" End quote. The acting DPP responded, quote, "I don't know if we can put a fixed cost to justice," end quote. Justice MacDonald Bishop shot back, "That's a requirement of the law," end quote. She eventually urged the acting DPP to use her time wisely. Conceding that she was not persuading the judges on the point of cost, the senior prosecutor responded, quote, "Very well, milady, I will not belabor the point," end quote. But she maintained that murder must be treated with seriousness. She told the court not to forget the murder, why it was done, and what happened after. The senior prosecutor did not fare much better when the matter of the timeline for a retrial was raised. Justice MacDonald Bishop pressed the prosecutor as to whether she agrees that a retrial date is uncertain. "Yes, my lady," responded the acting DPP. The prosecutor could only offer 2025 as her best estimate of a timeline for KARTEL to be retried. Justice MacDonald Bishop declared that the VYBZ KARTEL case has placed a microscope on what she described as systemic problems in Jamaica's judicial system. She says those problems may come to, quote, "bite us somewhere along the way," end quote. Justice MacDonald Bishop also warned the prosecution that the Court of Appeal would not be sending the case back for a retrial unless the state can prove it has all its witnesses. Senior Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions, Jeremy Taylor, who was the lead prosecutor in the original trial, has submitted an affidavit swearing that most of the original witnesses are available. But Justice MacDonald Bishop pointed out that there was no evidence that Mr. Taylor had spoken to any of the witnesses, nor was it clear that he had been in touch with all of them. The justice pointed out that simply providing a list of witnesses to the court by itself doesn't cut it. "We can't send a case when we know that you're running down witness over there," said Justice MacDonald Bishop. "We can't send a case when we know that you're running down witnesses over there," said Justice MacDonald Bishop. The prosecution will continue its arguments at 9:30 Friday morning. Ricardo Brooks for Nationwide News.
Meanwhile, the acting director of public prosecutions, Claudette Thompson, has told the Court of Appeal that the breach of KARTEL's constitutional rights is justified. The senior prosecutor conceded that the length of time the matter has been before court may be inordinate, but she maintains the breach is reasonable. The acting DPP says the court must consider the chronology of the events, starting with the arrests of the men in 2011, the trial and convictions, and the appeals. Thompson says the breach of the right to a trial in a reasonable time is justified, but Justice MacDonald Bishop appeared skeptical of the argument, pointing out that the men have already spent almost 13 years in custody.
And the Court of Appeal says the prosecution must explain how evidence from the initial murder trial of KARTEL and his co-accused made its way into the public domain. Justice Marva MacDonald Bishop, who is the lead judge of three who will decide whether a retrial will occur, asked how exhibits in the original trial became public. Justice MacDonald Bishop pointed to voice notes, videos, and voices from the original trial that have been widely circulated. The justice said she had a very real concern about the leak of evidence and how that may affect a retrial. Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions Yannick Forbes argued that the evidence was disclosed to all parties in the matter. He said while he was not laying blame on any side, there are many ways the evidence could have been leaked. During the trial, voice notes of conversations said to be with VYBZ Cartel were sensationally revealed by Nationwide News. Meanwhile, Deputy DPP Forbes attempted to argue that a potential retrial will not be prejudiced by the public discourse around the initial case and the public revealing of the evidence. However, Justice MacDonald Bishop challenged Mr. Forbes' position. The justice stressed how many radio stations, social media platforms, and other forms of media have already picked up and carried the evidence.
Murder